Pages from an American Storybook, A Story of Survivance by Kristin Bell. Ayana thought her name was dumb, and her mother was silly for choosing it. Ayana means eternal blossom, apparently, but her mother was French and Swedish, so she really had no business picking an Indian name from a book like that. Ayana's mom always wanted Ayana to be proud of her native heritage. Her dad was native, and Ayana's mom loved him more than anything else on earth. Ayana was jealous of the love that her mother had for him, because it seemed like her mother never had any love left over for her. In fact, it only got worse after her dad died. Her mom worshipped a ghost, and it was almost like she had died right along with him. When Ayana turned 18, she was out of there. She couldn't wait to escape the ghost worshipping and get on with her life. High school had largely been boring, but Ayana did as her mother asked and at least graduated. Her mom never had any money, so unlike all of her friends who went to college, Ayana stayed in town and got a job as a receptionist in the only auto shop in town. Her uncle worked there as a mechanic, and she knew everyone else too. So it wasn't like she really went that far. She just moved out into a crummy, too expensive for what you actually get, apartment. It turns out her adventures in living alone came to an abrupt end when her mom fell and broke her hip and couldn't work anymore. Ayana moved back home to help her mom and pay the rent. Even though Ayana's mom had wanted Ayana to be proud of her native heritage, it isn't like she even really knew what it was like to be native, aside from the fact that she never quite fit in and always had to play Pocahontas in every school play because the rest of the kids were white. Yes, seriously, Pocahontas. She couldn't believe it either, but it was her de facto role every year. Her dad had been kind of weird about living anywhere near Rez. He thought he'd become a cliché Indian if he stayed, so he left and married the whitest lady he could find. At least that is how Ayana figured it. Even though she had her mother's steel gray eyes, the rest of Ayana turned out like her dad, a shade of mocha that is nowhere near as popular as the drink. Sometimes Ayana would drive her beat-up blue paint-peeling Ford Escort an hour north and visit her grandparents on the res, but not that often. Not as often as she should. It was just so damn depressing. Her grandparents were always trying to tell her stories. She was like, "Okay, I get it. You're an Indian. Can we just watch some TV now?" Ayana wasn't always like that. She loved the stories when she was a kid. She just had a hard time believing them anymore. She had a hard time believing in anything, really. It had been 2 years since Ayana's dad was killed in the car accident. He was hit by a drunk driver on his way to work. Ayana thought it was morbidly ironic, considering most people considered native people to be drunks. The guy who hit him was white, and he survived the crash. He went to jail for like 6 months. Wow, some punishment. He was probably back on the road running over someone else's dad by now. Anyway, it had been 2 years already, but Ayana and her mom hadn't cleaned out her dad's closet yet. Every time Ayana brought it up for discussion, her ghost-worshipping mother would nix the idea. So Ayana, now living at home again and taking care of her mother with her bad leg, thought that she would just delve into it. She figured that most of it was just old junk and clothes anyway. It isn't that Ayana didn't miss him, too. She did, but she made a conscious effort to go on living while her mother decided to die. Ayana had to figure out a time when her mom would be out of the house. This was a bit of a problem, because her mom could barely walk, but Ayana managed to get her mom's friend to take her to a movie and lunch. It was Saturday, so Ayana didn't have to work. First she went through the clothes. She actually missed the smell of her dad that the clothes still had on them, but she packed them up and put them in a box for the Goodwill. She put her feet in his shoes, and then packed those up too. The closet and dresser went fast because her dad never had much anyway. She kept his lucky coin and felt its smoothness as she slipped it into her pocket. She put his reading glasses in a case and left them on top of the dresser. She took his watch and wrapped it around her own wrist. She would probably give it to her mom later. Next she had to work on the garage. Mostly her dad just had tools and some piles of wood, but underneath a box she had never really paid attention to before, Ayana found something interesting. They were audio tapes. They had to be from the 80s, since they were, actual tapes and not CDs. Ayana had a vague recollection of her dad at the res telling stories with Ayana on his lap. She was really young back then, so she didn't remember much, but she knew as soon as she saw the tapes that these were her dad's stories. Tears began to well up in her eyes. How did she not know about these? She considered herself to be completely unsentimental, but knowing that she could hear her dad's voice again was too much. She started throwing boxes and searching for her dad's old boombox. It was there somewhere. He never threw out electronics that still worked. She quickly found the boombox and stuck in the tape labeled Story 4 into the player. Hearing her dad's voice again was a revelation. She just wasn't sure why, but that night when she went to sleep, she could hear his echoes in her brain. She dreamt her dad's story right along with his voice that night. It was so real, the way the salmon sparkled like sequins. The rain fell like giant drops of cool moonlight and were wet against her skin. The trees rustled in the wind, and Ayana was in the middle of the forest, but never felt afraid. The world as she knew it fell away, and when she woke up, she was still in that forest under the starlight.